Howdy, folks, and welcome to another day in the Milky Way. Tonight we got a great show for you. We are going to be talking about the Nag Hammadi Scriptures. Scriptures, yes. We're going to be reading out of this book right here, or at least finding out, what is that book? So we're going to go into that a little bit and find out the Nag Hammadi Scriptures. Who doesn't want to know about that? And like always, I have good things to share. But I just want to say thank you all for coming by tonight. It is always a pleasure to have everybody here and watching. And, so we're going to get right into this on why everything is what it is. We are going to start with this here, because you can't just read the scriptures if you don't know the backstory. That's at least what I'm trying to say. So we're going to find out a little bit of the backstory, because you just got to find out what it's all about. Okay, so I'm going to shrink that. I'm going to share with you, as always. I try to do my best to provide you with great content and good sophistication in my humble abode. Anyway, here we go. Setting the present. There we go. Share screen, and ta-da, just like that, I am sharing with you wonderful things. Anyway, let's make this as big as we possibly can. No, I like the other way better. Nope, not like that. Not headlines. We're going to go like this. Nope. 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 Oh, like that. Yeah. How did I do that before? Anyway, it is what it is, people. Sorry. It was going better before. There. That's the way I like. That seems nice. Hope you all can see that pretty good. We're going to get right into this. I'll read this for you. This is on our right out of Wikipedia. Doesn't really say a whole lot. The town of Nag Hammadi was found on the site of older villages of Assam, and in the 19th century, and was named after a founder, Muhammad Pash Hammadi, a member of the Hammadi family in Sohag, Egypt. Mohammad Hammadi was a major landholder of Sohag and known for strong opposition to the British rule in Egypt, beginning in 1882. See, this goes way back. Nag Hammadi is about 5 miles, or 3.1 miles, 5 kilometers, west of ancient Czechoslovakian, ancient Greek. Yeah, no wonder I can't say it. The Nag Hammadi Library is an important collection of 2nd century Gnostic texts, was found in the Jabar Tafai near Nag Hammadi in 1945. Okay, so we got that part down. And Nag Hammadi Codex were made by monks. The provenance of the Nag Hammadi Codexes has been a point of content among scholars ever since they were discovered in Upper Egypt in 1945. A new book strongly supports the hypothesis that they were manufactured and read by Christian monks in the 4th and 5th centuries. The 2 pages of the Nag Hammadi Codex on the left, 32, showing the end of the Apocryphon of John and the beginning of the Gospel of Thomas on the right of this page. And I got something beeping. The world is ending. Oh, no. When these things don't work, they work. Yeah. So it just keeps trying to do its thing. Sorry about that. Shutting down. There we go. Shut down. Okay. There we go. Let's see. 13 papyrus books, codices, turned out to contain gospels, apocalypses, prayers, local writings, and acts of various apostles, none of which were included in the Bible. It also includes observations and commentaries on topics such as the meaning of existence, the creation of humankind, and the nature of salvation. Since their discovery, these works have provoked enormous interest among the scholars and public alike due to the startling new light that they throw on the early Christian movement. Professor Hugo Logog of the Faculty of Theology and the University of Oslo leads a research project funded by the European Research Council that focuses on these codices. The project is called the New Context for Old Texts, Unorthodox Texts, and Monastic Manuscripts, Culture of the 4th and 5th Century Egypt. Luhag tells us that the idea found in the Nag Hammadi codices are often very different from those familiar to us in the Bible. These codices demonstrate that a far greater diversity of thought existence and amongst people who consider themselves Christian that were previously thought. He explains. The codices are written in Coptic, a form of the Egyptian language used in the late antique period. They contain 52 works, most of which were previously unknown to modern scholars. It is probable, although not certain, that most of the texts were originally written in Greek and have been translated into the Coptic for the benefit of the non-Greek readers. Question of the origins of the codex. The question of who owned and produced the Nag Hammadi codices is a major importance to helping us to understand their historical significance. In order to understand what they may have meant to those who read them, it's important to know who actually read them. Together with the postdoctoral fellow in the New Kant project, Lance Genot Luhag has just published a book dealing with this question, entitled The Monastic Origins of the Nag Hammadi Codex. Luhag and Genot answer the question to their new book, and 4th and 5th century Christian literature. Okay, you want to read that? Go right ahead. We both felt the need to examine the evidence more closely, as many angles as possible, and assets and various alternatives. Yes, they studied it very well. In earlier attempts to answer the question of ownership, the controversial contents of the codices have led many scholars to insist that they have belonged to a group of Gnostics. The term Gnostic was generally applied in reference to exclusive communities influenced by Greek philosophy, whose members desired access to secret knowledge that were revealed only to a certain select few. As such, the codices thus became marked as heretical books and should have been read only by the Orthodox Christians, such as the early Christian monks. This point of view was reflected in the title of the book, blah, 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 codices, Egyptian Gnostics. Okay, we ain't going to go into that. Contents claim that the Gnostic origins, according to this guy, and following the lead of some other guy, the term Gnostic has never been satisfactorily defined and is often misleading when trying to understand those texts that have been labeled as such. Further, it is hard to find concrete evidence for societies or organizations in the 4th and 5th centuries who would fit modern scholarly notions of Gnostics. The wide diversity of texts found in the Nag Hammadi Codex makes it difficult to allocate these works to any one of the several viewpoints commonly given scholarly label Gnostic. Luhag says the texts do not readily conform to common stereotypical ideas of Gnostic attitudes, such as the hatred of the world and its creator, or the anti-biblical stance, he explains. Luhag and Jonog find Gnosticism to be highly misleading category that has led scholars to ask the wrong questions, offer unnecessary explanations. Their focus instead has been on diversity of the early Christianity in Egypt and the place of the Nag Hammadi Codex within it. They emphasize the fact that the aim has been to move the discussion of the origin and use of the Codex away from being a study of Gnosticism. They have therefore consciously jettisoned the term Gnostic in their analyst. Monks and their reading habits. The Egyptian monks were suggested by some of the scholars who were first studied the Codex, as they noted a particular existence of several monasteries in which, in the areas close to the discovery sites, such as the major Palermo monasteries in Chibuk. However, these suggestions have attracted considerable criticism from other scholars. They may have found it impossible to imagine that the early Pectomen monks, often considered to be the bastion of the orthodoxy, could have read such heretical literature. Criticism is most extensively expressed by this other guy, Alexander such and such, in 1995. He argued that they must have belonged to a group of urban intellectuals sufficiently educated in Greek philosophy to read and understand them. It is critical response, he said, this other guy said, the type of intellectuals imagined by Kosef would have simply read these texts in Greek. If the owners were urban intellectuals steeped in Greek philosophy and culture, why would they read their literary text in Coptic and bother to translate them into Greek in the first place? Yeah. Why would you translate from one language to the other? The case of monistic origin. They make their case for monistic origin by surveying a wide breadth of material, discussing a question from a multiple of angles. They set the stage with the discussion of natural monotheism in late antique Upper Egypt, using a variety of sources, including biographies, saints, monotheistic rules, documentary, papyri, and archaeological evidence, and demonstrate that, say that really fast, at a period was more diverse than has often been recognized, both in terms of organization and theology. Okay, they also discussed available evidence for the literary practices. Egyptian monks in the early centuries, the reading material of monks at the time cannot always be labeled as orthodox. Monks were criticized on several occasions by the church authorities for reading non-canonical or apocryphal literature. Despite the condemnation, such works continued to form part of the monotheistic libraries for many centuries to come. Let's see. The Nag Hammadi would have appealed to monks. They include allusions to subjects such as spiritual progress, revealed knowledge, visions, heavenly ascents, angels, demons, and antithetism, as well as emphasis on scriptural interpretations. It is easy to see how they might fit into a monotheistic library alongside biblical texts and other well-known monotheistic works of the period. Written on scrap paper. 2 important chapters in the book deal with the production techniques used in the making and the writing of the Codex in the relationship of the Nag Hammadi Codex to other Christian books produced at around the same period. The Nag Hammadi Codex are not unique in their makeup and scriptural practices. Luhag tells us, in fact, that the closely reassembled other books, including biblical manuscripts that are likely to have come from monotheistic menu. One example is a manuscript of the Gospel of Matthew held in such and such collection in Oslo. Okay, material stiffened the letter covers of the Nag Hammadi Codexes. Cartonnage was traditional, made up of scraps of discarded papyrus from personal letters, account books, and so on. It therefore provides invaluable evidence for everyday life and social context in which the codexes were produced. In the case of the Nag Hammadi Codex, these cartonages, the papyri, included an entire collection of personal letters written to and from monks, strongly suggesting that the codex themselves were produced by monks. These documents included several references to monks named Savos, who writes about economic and philanthropic issues with his correspondence. Some scholars have, however, dismissed these fragments as irrelevant, arguing instead that such letters might have been simply collected from a local rubbish heap and therefore shed no light on the bookmakers. Okay, there's likely these documents were in fact property of the people who made the codex, and as such were valuable evidence for pinpointing the origin of these books. One highly significant letter that it is in fact addressed to a certain Father Suchy of Papipus, whom Luhag enjoyed maintain is a famous abbot of himself. So then this letter demonstrates a close connection between the makers of the codex and the nearby Pharamecian monks. I hope you're all getting this. Likely owned by the monks. In the book, authors, however, to the Phoenician Federation in particular, to which the authors turn the answers to several of these Phoenician monasteries lay close to the place of discovery and use the cliffs for burials and aesthetic practices. It is not unlikely that the owners of these codexes were Paramecians. Okay, well, see, it all goes hand in hand. The guys who had the paper wrote on the paper, and when they got done with that paper, they wrote on the same paper again, like a chalkboard. Okay, there is evidence for ongoing concerns over apocryphal books read in the monasteries, and he explains the monks need to not have believed everything they read, but many of them would surely have been interested in various interpretations of the Bible. For example, stories about Adam and Eve, Jesus appearing to his disciples after his resurrection, which are recorded in these books, eventually discarded as heretic text. Very often, an overly idealistic picture of monotheism has obscurely ability to place Egyptian monks accurately within their own society. There you go. Gnostic has helped to create a distance between the text and the seemingly orthodox monks. It is important to remember that the monks who may have read these works for spiritual guidance were also likely to have had recourse to many other religious works within their libraries, including the books of the Bible. In time, as Christian thought developed, the reading of such unusual texts would have become less acceptable until finally the command came to discard them completely. Eventually discarded as heretic text, very often an overly idealistic picture of monotheism has obscured our ability to place Egyptian monks accurately within their own society. In addition, the over-application of the term Gnostic has helped to create a distance between text and seemingly orthodox monks. Yeah, it is important to remember that the monks who may have read these works for spiritual guidance, I think we read that. The authors expressed their hope that this book, blah, 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 many ways, will help people in many ways. Research of the fascinating manuscripts have only just begun. The state emphasizes on how important it is that the future studies of the Nag Hammadi text take fully into account the monotheistic provenance of the manuscripts, while studies of early Egyptian monotheism should not continue to ignore the Nag Hammadi Codex. Some of the earliest and most well-preserved evidence of monotheistic literature practices in existence. And here's a picture of the books, the Hammadi texts, whatever. Here's a little bit more on the library of them. The Nag Hammadi Library is a collection of early Christian scriptures. discovered in the Egyptian desert in the middle of the 20th century, that has forced us to reconsider much of what we thought we knew about early Christianity, especially the type of early Christianity known as Gnosticism. Books of the Nag Hammadi include The Secret Book of John, Reality of Rulers, Origin of the World, which recount elaborate myths about how the world was created by ignorant, malevolent being who inferior to the true God, and how a divine spark came trapped within the world. The Gospel of Thomas is saying gospel. That gives over 100 sayings attributed to Jesus, trace salvation as a matter of achieving mystical identification with Christ rather than merely believing in him. Gospel of Philip, which similarly proclaims that whoever obtains a rare spiritual insight called gnosis is no longer a Christian, but a Christ. 3 forms of first thought, a hymn written in the perspective of a female divine power who says that she put on Jesus like a garment and bore him from the cursed wood. The gospel of truth, a grand political sensitive homily that likens Jesus hanging on the cross to fruit hanging on a tree, giving life to those who eat it, and many, many more. The Maganam, boy, now I can't even say that, consists of 13 codices, an ancient handwritten book with papyrus pages and leather covers. These 13 codices together contain no less than 52 individual texts, or tracts, as they sometimes called, since 6 of these texts are duplicates, so there are 46 unique texts. 5 of these were known from previously smaller discoveries before in the Nag Hammadi library, before it was unearthed, but 41 were first-time discoveries. Unfortunately, 10 of those 41 texts are badly damaged and therefore fragmentary, so it might be more fitting to say that 31 rather than 41 texts have been added to our sources of information on Gnosticism and early Christianity more broadly. Still, that's more texts than are contained in the entire New Testament, 27, which underscores the magnitude of this find. Well, who buried them? That's the question, people. From dates on some of the materials in the codices were known that they were texts of the Nag Hammadi library were probably copied onto the pages of the codex around the middle of the 4th century AD. Unfortunately, however, we have no way of knowing who copied these texts. Sometime in the 4th or 5th century, the codexes were placed in a large clay container and buried under a cliff in the desert of Middle Egypt, near what is today the town of Nag Hammadi, where they lay until they were discovered more than a millennium and a half later by a peasant digging for fertilizer. While we can't know for sure who buried these scriptures or why, history and archaeology have provided us with some compelling clues. During the 4th and 5th centuries, there was a Phoenician monastery, and that monastery that followed the model of the monotheistic life established by the Egyptian Christian ascetic Parmosius, close to the cliff where the Nag Hammadi library was buried. Caves in the same cliff were decorated in such a way that makes it clear that they were once used by the monks for spiritual retreats. In the eastern Mediterranean region, during that period, hiding books in jars was a common way of preserving them when others sought to destroy them. When one wanted to destroy a book, one typically burned it, or at least flung it into the water. It therefore seems likely that the Nag Hammadi library was buried where it was for a safekeeping by one or more of the monks who went to those caves to commune with God. In the context of the time, such burial would have probably implied that someone had threatened to destroy the books. Who might have been, or what motivations there would have been. Of course, that's 1,500 years ago. While the Nag Hammadi library is by far the largest and most important find in the Gnostic scriptures, it is the only one. 4 others, of all which come from Egypt and feature works of Coptic translation, deserve a mention here. One of those so-called Berlin Codex, a 5th century papyrus book discovered near Alchem in the 1890s. It contains the Gospel of Mary, the Secret Book of John, the Wisdom of Jesus, and non-Gnostic Acts of Peter. Because of various inopportune circumstances in international affairs and other personal lives of the scholars who were working in the Codex, these texts weren't published until 1955. Another of the Askew Codex, which was discovered in 1773, its contents are Physis Sophia and 2 fragmentary untitled writings. The third is a Bruce Codex. Its name is something of a misnomer. Simply, it's actually a collection of 2 codexes that include the first book of Jude, the second book of Jude, and the few miscellaneous untitled works. It came to light in 1769. Finally, there is the Codex Tracos. Sounds like tacos. Found near Almelia in 1970. I butchered that name too. Within its pages are a letter of Peter to Philip, the first apocalypse of James, here titled simply James, the book of Allegories, and the Gospel of Judah. The first 2 of these texts were also already known from Nag Hammadi, but the second 2 are only preserved in this codex. Laminarity, the book was handed very epically after its discovery and is badly damaged. The Gospel of Judah, or what could be pieced together from the surviving fragments of this manuscript, was finally published in 2006. Oh boy. With these discoveries, the Gnostic scriptures and the heretics finally get to speak for themselves. Okay, what did you expect, right? Gnostics were, and they believe in this practice. Okay, however, the Gnostic texts present their own hazards for those who understand Gnosticism. For one thing, the quality of some Coptic translation is poor. There is also the issue of scriptural errors, perhaps the most serious issue. With the form in which a manuscript has come down to us is considerable amount of damage and a missing text in many of them. The form of text could vary greatly across time and space. This is perhaps most vividly illustrated by the fact that of the 4 copies of the Sacred Book of John we have today, no 2 are identical. Some of the variations are small, but others are large and consensual for our understanding of the messages and the themes of the text. Of course, this is a problem with ancient hand-printed books, including the Bible. The Gospel of Mark, for example, originally came to an end at verse 16:8, where the women flee Jesus' empty tomb and risen Jesus hasn't made an appearance. Yeah, I wonder what the rest of it said. The version of Mark, which we today are familiar, extends the chapter by an additional 12 verses. More fundamentally, however, how do we connect particular texts to particular ancient groups of people? The tribute were long dead, and when these works were composed, just as the case, none of these texts explicitly say who wrote them. Who actually wrote them? This is the apostles to whom some of the texts were attributed were long dead. This is important, people. When these works were composed, just as the case of most of the New Testament writings attributed to the apostles, who used them, in what ways, or for what reasons. We're left to infer all that is from the text and other sources we have on early Christianity. Such ambiguous leaves ample room for completing interpretations. Gnosticism never existed in antiquity, and the Nag Hammadi texts are now considered Gnostic. are the works of many different religious groups that didn't what? Oh, anyway, let's go on. Let's see what this is. The Secret Book of John. Okay, introduction. If there's a single quintessential Gnostic text, it's almost certainly the Secret Book of John, also sometimes called Apocryphathon of John. Fancy words. It's also a landmark text for the Christianity, blah, blah, blah. Okay, implies the Secret Book of John was intended to be a supplement to the Gospel of John. Okay, yes, okay, we get that. Scythians, okay, Gnostics that modern scholars refer to. So the Gnostics were the Scythians. Since the Gospel of John was written in 90 to 95 AD, and since the Secret Book of John was discussed by the Proto-Orthodox Christian church, whatever, around the year 180, the Secret Book of John must have been written sometime between those two dates. It was probably composed in Alexandria, Egypt, which at the time was one of the most cosmopolitan cities in the Mediterranean world and had a thriving, intellectual, active Christian community that was steeped in the Jewish, Greek, and Egyptian lore from which the text draws. The Secret Book of John holds the knowledge of the origins of the universe and the human condition. It is essential for spiritual salvation and so recounts those origins, with the intent of thereby facilitating the salvation of the readers. Christ appears in a vision to his distraught apostle John, reveals secrets about the cosmos and salvation in order to confront him and point him toward the right path. First, Christ says that there was only God, the one who described the mysteries, and even deliberately. Okay. Dalibor and his minions, the rulers. This is where it starts getting good, people. Greek archons created Adam, the first human, as a way of trapping a spark of divinity in their terrible world so that they can sadistically control it. Emissaries from heaven come down to earth and try to help Adam, his offspring, achieve gnosis, the mystical knowledge of their true nature and home as heavenly beings, and the root of the word, Gnostic, which provides salvation from the clutches of matter and the rules of matter. But Dalibor and his forces do everything they can to prevent humankind from attaining gnosis. And so humankind, with its two competing natures, becomes locked in a struggle between these two sides that continue to this day. Yes, they do. See, people, nothing's changed in thousands of years. It's always been this way. Two competing forces trying to keep us. One wants us to go forward, and the other wants us to go backwards or stay somewhere. In the interest of eliminating a common source of confusion about the Secret Book of John, all of the beings who inhabit heaven are reflections or copies of God, and are to some degree interchangeable, just like the three parts of the more familiar later Christian Trinity, the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit. This is why the text tends to identify them all with each other and sometimes swaps one for the other mid-scene in a way that can feel abrupt and jarring. So don't worry too much about making precise distinctions between Christ, Barbalo, Germardians, Seth, life, reflection, etc., and keep them straight, because the text itself has constantly shape-shifting back and forth to illustrate the point that ultimately they're all one God. 4 copies of the Secret Book of John have been discovered in modern times. 3 come from the Nag Hammadi Library, and the 4th comes from the so-called Berlin Codex. All are Coptic translations, even though the Secret Book of John was originally written in Greek. The fact that so many copies of this have been found, along with the fact that the such and such felt the need to discuss it at length despite his hostility to it, attests to the text evidently popular in antiquity. The Scythians. Who are these Scythians? As the term classic Gnostic implies, the classic Gnostics were the original group of Gnostics in antiquity. Back then, they were known simply Gnostics and almost certainly referred to themselves as such. Today, they're sometimes called classic Gnostics. To differentiate them from other theological Gnostic groups of early Christians, the Valentinians, they arose sometime in the early or 2nd century AD, and by the year 180, they were spread throughout the Roman Empire. Terminology. Boy, we went through a lot of that. Ever since 1974 publication, Hans Martin Shackley, modern scholar, has sometimes nicknamed Gnostics Scythians due to the importance they place on the Old Testament figure Seth, the third son of Adam and Eve. This usage of Scythian is somewhat unfortunate since the term originated with the unscrupulous 3rd century Hierologist Hypothalamus of Rome. Hypothalius used Scythian to denote what he imagined to have been a sect within the group of early Christians that is more careful, predatorous, they called Gnostics, as they were called Gnostic sects, and they called Scythians. Okay, so we called the Gnostics Scythians. Although modern scholars use the term Scythian, they nickname the classic Gnostics as a whole, blah, blah, blah. That's a bunch of nonsense. There, okay. Okay, the race of Seth. Despite the unnecessary confusion, Scythian is rather easy to see why these guys referred to the Gnostics. Okay, Seth is mentioned in the 4th and 5th chapters of Genesis, after one of Adam and Eve's sons, Abel, was murdered by their other son, Cain. You can't escape all this bad and good stuff, Eve became pregnant once more. In the words of Genesis, Adam knew his wife again. She bore a son and named him Seth. For God had appointed another seed for me instead of Abel, who Cain killed. The same different way. When Adam had lived 130 years, he became the father of a son in his likeness, according to his image, and named him Seth. Okay, for the Gnostics, blah, blah, blah. Okay, the world was ruled by demonic beings called archons. The classic Gnostics held the liturgic archons had raped Eve shortly after she was created, but Eve's spirit left her body before the horrible deed began. This purely flesh intercourse produced 2 purely fleshy sons, Abel and Cain. But Eve later had voluntary loving sex with Adam, and their spirits, their spiritual likeness that had been placed in them by God, were fully intact and present. Seth was conceived as another seed that is spiritual seed, as opposed to the merely physical seed of Cain and Abel. Well, that's some deep diving. The sons of Adam and Eve founded races of people according to whether or not they possessed spirit. Did you get that? The sons of Adam and Eve found races of people. They founded the races of people according to whether or not they possessed spirit. Since no spirit had been imparted to Abel or Cain, their races cared only for sensory pleasure and earthly well-being, with no capacity for serious spirituality. But the race of Seth, though the one appointed by God, possessed spirit like its progenitor and was capable of achieving salvation, with the Gnostic called Gnosis. The classic Gnostic identified themselves as a race of Seth, and rest of humankind was with races of Cain and Abel. Well, there you go. If you're from Cain and Abel, you got no spirit. And if you're from the line of Seth, you're in, baby. Oh, but race of Seth were man, marking people distinct spiritual, religious identity and destiny, a narrower version of the wider ancient Christian uses of the radical language. See, they were dividing people way back then. But the idea of belonging to the race of Seth had a traditional meaning for the classic Gnostics. Everyone else in society around them belonged to the races of Cain and Abel, which made them the classic Gnostic strangers in foreign land, no matter where they went. Indeed, since the other seed from which Seth had come from was from an incorporeal and incorruptible world that was starkly different from this world. The race of Seth wasn't only foreign to societies in which it lived, it was foreign to the material world altogether. Well, there you go. And it just goes on and on. Okay, here we go. We got a good map here. As you can see, this is the area it was discovered in. A little bit off of the River Nile here, and here's Egypt, Nile River, and you can see it's right in this area. I ain't gonna read all this over because this is just stuff we have already read, and you can look it up too. Okay, here's our picture area of discovery. This is what the pages would have looked like. And broken bits of paper. So we gotta kind of ad lib when there's a piece tore off. They're all handwritten. They didn't have the printing press back then, so they had to all write it out by hand. Makes it hard when there's a big hole in it. And here you go, big pile of scrapbooks. And the caves. You see all the little caves down here? Yeah, you can see the little caves where they might have hid the stuff. Mountain. Inside one of the caves. You see they were doing some digging there. And that's all I have to share with you. Well, I hope you all enjoyed that rendition. I hope you could see. I got some stuff in here. I was looking up and seeing some things, and I wanted to read you a little bit out of this one. This one is on page 99 of it. It says, "In fact, we confess the kingdom of Christ is for the abolishment of all diversibility, inequality, and difference. For the end will regain the form of existence of a single one, just as in the beginning was a single one, a place where there is no male and female, nor slave and free man, nor circumcised or uncircumcised, nor angel or human, but all in all is Christ. How can one who did not exist at first be found to come into being unless the nature of the one is not a slave, since he will take a place together with a free man, for they will even obtain direction, vision, so that they will no longer have to believe on the account only of a small word produced by a voice that is, this is how things are." I don't know if that makes any sense to you, but there you go. A lot of stuff in this book. Good one to check out. Remember, Nag Hammadi is kind of big and thick. Give you enough reading for years to come. But anyhow, hope you're all doing real good. Thank you for joining me tonight. We went over a little bit over my half hour of a short show, but I hope it was all worth it and you stayed tuned. Thank you for being here. I appreciate each and every one of you. Remember, go out and do something nice for somebody, anybody. Remember, just give them a smile and show them a little peace and favor. And with that, remember, go out and be the frequency you want to receive, everyone.